Hello, everyone. I hope you guys and your family are doing good. I'm here to keep you up to date with current market news, teachings, and techniques. This is in no way, shape, or form financial or investment advice. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only. So I'll go ahead and jump right into it. Basically, one of the things I've been looking at is again, now I'm noticing that the blue chips companies, the big guys such as Apple, what is a blue chip? A blue chip company, blue chip companies are large cap stocks. Total value of their outstanding shares is 10 billions or more, $10 billion or more. Blue chip stocks are represented in the leading market indices like the S&P 500 and Dow Jones Industrial Average. So recently, Apple earnings report was released, and Apple sees the first profit miss in 7 years. That's pretty crazy. That Apple hasn't had a loss in that long, right? But it's not a surprise considering they're one of the major companies in the U.S., right? So in the recent earnings report, Apple announced a disappointing first quarter earnings report, including rare misses on revenue, profit, and sales. They go on blaming it on China COVID policies, COVID-19 lockdowns that had occurred in China throughout 2022. Zero COVID policy. That's why I always look outside of the US to see what's going on in the globe, because the world is connected, right? What occurs elsewhere tends to somehow affect us here. So the company also marked its largest quarterly revenue drop in nearly 7 years. That's pretty crazy that, it's been 7 years since they had a loss, and then this loss has occurred now, revenue drop. So basically goes into, tech companies still laying off a ton of people. I mean, tech industry, Amazon is facing a difficult reset after its pandemic boom and recently announced 18,000 job cuts. The tech and retailing giant reported a net loss of 2.7 billion in 2022 compared to net income of 33 billion the year before. The loss included a pre-tax loss of 12 billion on its investments in electric vehicle maker Rivian. So yeah, Rivian is that you've probably seen their trucks around. EV trucks company was extremely overpriced when it was initially became public into the market. I think it IPO'd at like 70 something bucks, and it went up to like 100 something, absolutely ridiculous. Just showed the big bubble that was in the EV market. And we're seeing now that kind of bubble pop with Tesla stock shares dramatically dropping. I think they're down like something crazy, like 70% for the year. I mean, it's in terms of fundamentals, Tesla was overvalued like crazy for a very long time. And now we're seeing that things tend to return or tend to lead to go towards back fundamentals at some point. The some point is the part that is difficult to determine, right? So this just goes on to basically tech industry is still struggling, and now Apple is mentioning layoffs themselves. So now Apple is advising, their CEO Cook did not mention layoffs, but said that the company would be closely monitoring its labor expenses. What does that mean? That means they might potentially consider laying off people. They just don't want to say that. We're cutting costs, he said. We're cutting hiring. We're being very prudent and deliberate on the people we hire. So it seems like they're reducing expenses, and the only reason they would do that if they see things are getting challenging and difficult ahead. So that is basically Apple, which is one of the big companies, is now suddenly beginning to have difficulties. So if it's current Apple, I mean, it's pretty scary stuff, right? And then one thing about that, so when the tech industry slows down, right, tech typically makes money off of advertisers because they place a lot of ads. They can target you via algorithms to see what you as a social media user or whatever likes, and then they can promote and advertise and target you with whatever advertising they think might potentially be something that you might purchase. So if revenue for advertisement is going down, that means potentially that people are buying less goods and services. So on another note, similar layoffs in corporate America spread to the tech. From tech to conglomerates. Conglomerates is just big companies that are basically mashed together because they have acquired a lot of other companies. They, in this article, they base off kind of saying it like it's almost like a contagion, like a virus that is spreading from one industry to another. So on Tuesday morning, 3M announced it would cut 2,500 manufacturing jobs as slower than expected growth followed from the company called rapid declines in consumer facing markets. And then they go again, China's fault, right? Along with significant slowing in China due to COVID related disruptions. That would be China's zero COVID policy. Again, that's why I like looking to see what is occurring outside of the US to kind of give me an idea of what might occur over here. So the news from 3M followed an announcement Monday that Newell Brands, that the Sharpie maker would cut 13% of his office staff. So it goes into basically, which this is something that I find interesting still. The unemployment rate stands at its lowest level in over 40 years, which I'll go into that in a second. So Newell, for its part, employs 32,000 people. And they're advising that they plan to cut majority of their office worker employees, not the manufacturing side. So basically, then this is just corporate America, right? And no matter the economic environment, some companies is always looking to restructure its business and in turn reduce headcount. So it shows the loyalty that there is in corporate America. When the first turn of trouble, they're just going to lay off as much people as they possibly can to cut expenses and reduce costs, right? So here it goes into, there's still a shortage in nurses. And then I'm curious to see if there is a shortage in government employees, medical staff, and so forth. Because if that's what's keeping the labor market strong, it is not necessarily a good thing for the economy. Why? Because typically government employees are paid via taxes, right? So that what is it doesn't influence gross domestic product, which I'll kind of go into a second. So 3M, Newell companies, they make notebooks, glue, gauze, Sharpies, these kinds of items. So if they're now having a slowdown in their industry, I'm curious to speculate that maybe that is that office businesses and so forth are purchasing less office supplies. Just curious on that note. So yeah, I was kind of going into GDP, so gross domestic products. GDP provides an economic snapshot of a country used to estimate the size of an economy and its growth rate. GDP can be calculated in three ways using expenditures, production, and incomes, and it can be adjusted for inflation and population to provide a deeper insight. Something I've been looking at, GDP around the globe has been dropping. For example, in Europe, the most recent GDP print was 1.9%. The previous one to that was 2.3%. So it dropped from 2.3% to 1.9%. In Italy, it was the most recent GDP print was 1.7%. The previous to that was 2.7%. So it dropped literally 1%. Canada was 0%, most recent GDP print. Prior to that, it was 0.1%. That means there was that much growth within the economy, but you can kind of see the trend downward. And this is occurring a lot throughout the globe, which I find interesting. potentially signaling a global slowdown. So on another note, something I found interesting is that in South Korea's exports and imports have dropped dramatically over the recent period. So, for example, South Korea exports year over year have dropped negative 16.6%. That was the most recent print. Prior to that, it was negative 9.6%. What this means potentially, and then why this even look at this, is because South Korea is a very technologically advanced country. They supply a lot of metals and semiconductors, right? Semiconductors or anything that has anything to do with electronics tech has semiconductors within them. And the fact that they're exporting or selling less of their goods and services might potentially mean that they're selling less of these items. For example, one of the biggest semiconductor producing companies in the world, Samsung, which produces memory chips, South Korean company. So it's something that I find interesting. And basically, on another note, so yeah, on the import-export talk. So a decrease in exports and imports can indicate several things for a country's economy: slowing economic growth, slow economic growth, protectionist policies, currency fluctuation, changes in the country's exchange rate can also lead to a decrease in exports and imports. If the country's currency appreciates, exports may become more expensive and less competitive in the global market, while its imports may become cheaper. Global economic factors, a decrease in exports and imports can also be a result of global economic factors such as recession. The currency part of it, right? So currencies have been increasing in purchasing power. Why? Because central banks around the world have been increasing their interest rates, such as we're seeing here with the Federal Reserve, right? They're increasing their interest rates, so the strength of that currency, the purchasing power of that currency increases. Now that makes that country's exports more expensive for other countries, considering that the global economy is a very competitive market. Typically, consumers are going to look for the cheapest possible option for whatever materials or services they need, right? So that goes into the labor market, right? As the lingo goes, still tight labor market, meaning unemployment rate is really low, which it is. It's 3.4%, came out on the recent print, lowest since 1969. However, this can be viewed in a way as a negative thing for the market. Why? I'll go into that in a second, but you can kind of see where unemployment rates have been historically in the past with this little chart. So that's pretty cool. So it is pretty historically low. However, notice here how it was low and suddenly a huge spike out of nowhere. So that's another interesting thing. So even Europe's unemployment rate is historically low currently as well. Last recent print was 6.6%, which is pretty low. And then the reason why it might not be good news for the market in the US is because Federal Reserve still pledges to fight inflation and bring it down to 2%. So currently in the most recent meeting, which was a few days ago or last week, something like that, Federal Reserve announced they're going to raise rates by another 25 basis points, which is just a fancy way of saying 0.25%. So Fed rate fund went from 4.5% to 4.75%, which is over the terminal rate, which they had advised was 4.6%. I'm not quite sure what that target was, but they did surpass that. So yeah, that's kind of some of the things I'm seeing in the market recently that I find interesting. So with the rate hike that the Federal Reserve recently announced is so I found this interesting here. Chairman Jerome Powell reinforced the disinflation process is on an early stage and that interest rates are not yet at a sufficiently restricted level. What I take from that is basically that they're not done raising rates. And why this is important, because the market does not like high rates or higher rates, right? Higher rates means more expensive to borrow for whatever you're purchasing, because now you're paying more interest for borrowing that money to purchase whatever item you're looking to purchase. So yeah, I find that to be not very good for the markets, at the very least. So with that being said, I'll leave you with a market quote that I like. So the speculator, George Soros, when making a financial bet, keeps looking for instances that would prove his initial theory wrong. This perhaps is true self-confidence, the ability to look at the world without the need to find signs that stroke one's ego. And I found this quote in the book The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. If you have not read that book, I highly recommend it. It's amazing. It changed my perspective on the world. So yeah, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I hope I shared some valuable information with you today, and I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.